So I want you to imagine standing right in the middle of the living room of a burning house.
Okay.
The walls are blistering, the smoke is just banking down from the ceiling. The floorboards are literally beginning to give way under your feet.
Right. Total catastrophe.
Exactly. But instead of grabbing your family and, I don't know, running for the front door, you just casually walk over to the mantelpiece and start, carefully rearranging the family photos.
Just making sure they're perfectly centered.
Right. You just start dusting the furniture. You look at this blistering wallpaper and you think, I really need to repaint this next spring.
It's completely absurd.
It is absolute irrational absurdity. Giving your heart, your attention, and, your affection to a structure that is actively disintegrating around you. But that is exactly how the Apostle John views the church's relationship with the world.
Yeah, that's exactly the framework.
Usually when we talk about worldliness in the pulpit, we completely lose that existential urgency.
We really do.
There's this congregational expectation of behavioral precision. You basically give your people a list of taboos, the cultural boundary markers of whatever decade we happen to be in.
The checklist.
The checklist. You just point to the list and say, there it is, avoid those movies, don't listen to that music, stay away from those specific places.
Right, because checklists are manageable, They don't require any actual internal auditing.
No, not at all.
They just require behavioral modification, which, let's be honest, is the easiest thing in the world to fake.
Exactly. It's deeply comforting for a congregation. We like things to be categorized, to be these highly visible boundary lines.
Yeah.
So we preach worldliness as this abstract, distant threat or just like a menu of secular behaviors you can opt out of.
But then you step into the actual Greek text of 1 John chapter 2.
Yes, specifically verses 15 through 17. And suddenly that simplistic behavioral checklist is just completely obliterated.
John isn't managing behavior here.
Not even close. We are looking at a diagnostic landscape that forces an immediate, catastrophic crisis right into the internal reality of the believer.
Yeah.
And that is exactly the pastoral burden of this text and exactly why we're taking you, the advanced ministry practitioner, directly into the engine room of this passage today.
It's a deep dive you have to take.
Right. This is not about tweaking a few behavioral habits. John is executing a profound surgical strike on the internal affections of the church. If you've been preaching 1 John 2:15 through 17 as a mere call to moral separation, you're missing the profound kinetic energy of the text.
And to expose that energy, we have to establish our linguistic parameters immediately.
Let's do it.
Because the grammar is the engine of that agency. We are looking at the original Koine Greek text of 1 John 2:15 through 2:17.
Koine Greek, right.
And to strip away the centuries of homiletic gloss, we are going to read this strictly through the lens of systemic functional linguistics. We're going to map the ideational, interpersonal, and textual metafunctions clause by clause, tracking the participant chains and the process types. But crucially, and this is big regarding verbal aspect, we're operating entirely within Constantine Campbell's spatial model.
Which means, for everyone mapping their exegesis along with us today, we are taking all temporal, time-based definitions of tense, and we are leaving them completely at the door.
Completely. We are throwing out past action with present results.
Gone.
We are throwing out the old dot and line temporal graphs that, we all learned in first-year Greek.
I remember drawing those on the chalkboard.
Right. We're strictly applying the axis of proximity and remoteness. Present and perfect tense forms encode spatial proximity. They bring the action near to the speaker.
Right.
And aorist and imperfect tense forms encode remoteness. They push the action away. And before we even, partition the very first clause, we need to recognize the massive architectural feature dominating this entire pericope.
The overarching structural reality that governs everything John is doing here.
Exactly. Every single finite verb in this passage is a present tense form.
Every single one.
Right.
From verse 15 all the way down to the end of 17.
Yes. Under Campbell's spatial paradigm, this means the entire passage is locked into imperfective aspect and spatial proximity.
So John is deploying a relentless spatial zoom.
Relentless. He absolutely refuses to use an aorist. He refuses to push anything into the background.
Wow.
He's forcing the eschatological tension out of the abstract distance and right into the immediate internal street-level view of the reader. There is absolutely no aspectual remoteness here.
It's all unfolding, right? In progress, right in front of your face.
Yes.
So if John is locking us into this extreme, zoomed-in spatial proximity, how does he actually initiate the confrontation? Like, where does the very first blow land in the grammar? Take us into the opening clause.
Okay, so clause 215 reads,
Right.
When we parse the ideational metafunction here, we see exactly where that blow lands. We are looking at a mental process of affection.
Okay, so it is not a material process of action.
Exactly, it's mental. The censor in this clause is the second-person plural audience. So you, the believers in the Ephesian congregations, and by extension, the church today.
Right, the readers.
And the phenomenon, the target of this mental process is dual. It's tesmon, and then the ellipted elaboration, tesma.
Wait, let me stop you right there on the ellipsis. He drops the noun there in that second half, right?
He does. It's
But-
nominal ellipsis. He drops pragmata, or things, to streamline the focus directly onto the spatial sphere itself.
I see.
He says, do not love the world nor the in the world. By omitting the noun, the textual metafunction forces all the weight onto the location.
The sphere of existence.
Right. Interpersonally, this is an imperative mood. And especially, like we established, the present tense form of ekad heavily encodes that imperfective aspect and spatial proximity.
Let's translate this homiletically right out of the gate because, this changes how you frame your entire sermon.
Oh, absolutely.
The interpersonal metafunction, the imperative mood, creates a state of high, direct obligation. Pastorally, you can't preach this as a strong suggestion.
No.
You can't frame it as a wise principle for a healthy spiritual life. This is a mainline command.
A direct order.
But because the ideational metafunction is a mental process of affection, not a material process, the command is to sever the cognitive and emotional loyalty to the world system. You're preaching an internal severing.
That's a great way to put it.
Think about the husband who never physically commits adultery. He never commits the material action. But his mind and his affections are entirely captivated by someone else.
His marriage is rotting from the inside.
Exactly.
Yeah.
John is telling the church, look, I don't just care that you aren't doing the outward actions of the world. I am commanding you to sever the internal cognitive affection for the system itself.
And that internal severing is viewed from the inside. The imperfective aspect of ekadu forces the internal viewpoint.
Right.
John is not viewing this prohibition perfectively, like from a helicopter view, summarizing it as a complete whole. He is down on the street demanding an ongoing, unfolding resistance to this affection.
Which makes it so intense.
And the proximity means this affection isn't a historical problem the Ephesians dealt with in the past. And it's not some future apocalyptic threat either.
It's right now.
It's a threat right here, right now, in the immediate spatial reality of the believer. The command is active because the threat is active.
So if we are locked into this internal unfolding severing of affection, how does John diagnose if someone is actually failing at it?
Right, because it's internal.
Exactly. You can't see a mental process of affection from the outside. If someone is sitting in the pew, perfectly well-behaved, keeping all the outward rules, how does the pastor or even the individual believer audit what is actually happening in their spatial proximity?
That is exactly what John provides next. He moves from the command directly into the diagnostic.
Okay, where are we now?
In clause 215b, we read, Aintis ekatent kosmon. We have a major textual shift here.
Walk us through the shift.
The textual metafunction reveals a marked conditional protasis initiated by n. The ideational process remains exactly the same. We're still in a mental process of affection.
But the censor changes.
Right. The censor shifts from the direct second-person plural to the indefinite tis anyone. And the subjunctive mood in eka maintains that present tense form, so it continues the imperfective spatial proximity.
The conditional framework of this protasis is just, it's homiletic gold. This is an if/then tripwire.
Tripwire is the perfect word.
The if acts as a live diagnostic test for the congregation. You preach this clause as an active audit of the church's internal allegiance.
Yep.
The subjunctive mood frames this as a hypothetical yet entirely plausible unfolding posture of world love. You're asking your people to audit their immediate spatial reality.
Right, you bring it to them.
You look at your congregation and say, if anyone is currently in close proximity unfolding an affection for the world, You're pulling the abstract concept of worldliness down from the theological shelf and just placing it right in their laps.
Which triggers the apodosis, the devastating resolution to that tripwire in clause 215c.
Let's hear it.
The estin egepi tokaktini. Ideationally, we've shifted from a mental process of affection to a relational attributive process.
Okay.
The carrier is egepatopatros, the love of the Father, and the attribute is a negated presence, further specified by the circumstantial location it act in him.
And interpersonally.
Interpersonally, this is a categorical indicative statement, and textually, this is absolutely vital. The negated verb okesti is heavily marked by fronting.
Oh, wow.
John places it at the absolute beginning of the clause for maximum undeniable disjunction. He doesn't say, the love of the Father is not in him. He says, not is the love of the Father in him.
Wait, okay, I'm genuinely struggling with this piece of the spatial mapping. Let's pause here because I need to push back on this.
Okay, what's the hang-up?
Well, we are strictly applying Campbell's kinetic spatial axis, right?
Yes.
We're saying the present tense form encodes an unfolding kinetic process viewed from the inside in spatial proximity to the speaker.
Correct. Proximity and remoteness.
Okay, but if the verb esti is literally just the lexemiae, which is a pure state of being, doesn't that fundamentally break Campbell's whole rule about the kinetic spatial axis?
How so?
How can something just be, or in this case not be, but also be actively kinetically unfolding? You can't have spatial movement or an unfolding kinetic process from the inside if the verb is purely stative.
Ah.
Doesn't the spatial proximity framework break down entirely here? I mean, isn't this just traditional stative aspect where the action is completely frozen?
I see exactly why you're hitting that wall, but we have to strictly defend Campbell's framework here. You are conflating semantic aspect with actions art.
I am.
Yes, and it's a trap that commentators fall into all the time with the verb aime. Under Campbell's model, we reject traditional stative aspect as a distinct semantic category.
Okay, so what is it then?
The stativity you are identifying here, the frozen, unchanging state of being, is an action-sart pragmatic implicature. It is not the encoded meaning of the tense form itself.
Break that down for me. Give me a metaphor for the pastor who is, prepping their exegesis and staring at this verb, trying to figure out how a state of being is kinetically unfolding.
Okay, think of semantic aspect like a camera lens.
A camera lens.
Right, and action-sart is like the actual subject you're filming.
Okay.
Semantic aspect. So the present tense form is a macro lens. It's zoomed all the way in, recording in real time, unfolding proximity. That lens never changes.
Got it.
Now, the subject you are pointing that lens at, the actions art of the word itself, can change. If you point that zoomed in macro lens at a cheetah running across the savannah, you see kinetic, intense motion. If you point that exact same macro lens at a parked car, the image looks static. The car isn't moving. But the lens hasn't changed. The camera is still actively recording in real-time proximity.
Well, that makes sense.
In clause 215c, the present tense form of esti means the camera lens is zoomed in and rolling in real-time imperfective proximity. The fact that S is a state of being just means we're pointing that active camera at a parked car.
Okay, wow.
The semantic aspect encoded by the present tense form remains imperfective. The spatial value remains proximity near to the speaker.
So the spatial value of proximity holds completely firm, even with a verb of being.
Entirely firm. John is not describing a static, timeless, abstract void where the Father's love simply fails to exist in some philosophical, disconnected realm.
Right.
Because of the spatial proximity of the present tense form, this absence of the Father's love is an unfolding, highly present, immediate reality. It is a living, breathing vacuum.
A living vacuum.
Yeah.
That distinction between action-sart, pragmatic implicature, and semantic aspect is absolutely critical for the pulpit.
It changes the delivery.
It really does, because pastorally, this means the absence of God's love in a worldly heart is an active, ongoing spiritual reality happening right now in the pew.
Yes.
If you preach this as a timeless, static theological fact, the two simply cannot coexist in a theoretical sense, you lose the existential threat.
You lose the bite.
You must preach that fronted negated verb eastin as a solemn, immediate exposure of spiritual incompatibility. It's a living vacuum. Think about being in an airplane when the cabin depressurizes.
Oh, that's a terrifying thought.
Right. The absence of oxygen isn't just a static fact. It's a violent, immediate reality that affects everything in proximity to it. The spatial zoom makes the absence kinetic.
It forces the believer to realize that their internal affection has immediate atmospheric consequences.
Yeah, exactly. It brings an absolute undeniable weight to the diagnostic. This isn't a theoretical incompatibility. It's a spatial impossibility within the believer's immediate sphere.
You can't have both.
You really can't. If the world love is actively unfolding in the room, the Father love is actively, presently absent, period. And that stark reality sets the foundation for how John grounds this severity.
We have to look at the rationale.
Yes, we need to look at how he builds the theological rationale for this absolute disjunction, moving into clauses 216a through 216d. How does he justify this zero-tolerance diagnostic?
He justifies it by defining exactly what the world is comprised of.
Let's see the text.
We move to clause 216a utipata taxmo. The textual metafunction highlights the causal marker, because, or for.
Okay, tying it back.
Right. This conjunction physically anchors the previous command and diagnostic to the fundamental reality he's about to reveal. Ideationally, we're entering a massive relational identifying process.
And
Textually, John deploys heavy nominal fronting. He takes the token, tutanto, all that is in the world, and places it right at the front of the clause to establish a comprehensive, inescapable topical theme before we even get to the predicate.
He doesn't just say the bad parts of the world.
No.
He says cuss.
Oh.
All of it. Everything contained within that spatial sphere. But he doesn't just leave it as a broad, vague category, which is where clause 216b comes in with the elaborative triad.
Yes, the breakdown.
He breaks down all that is in the world into ipitupma, tos tonskat, aptuma, don tutonkat, ibdonia to tobon.
Those three appositional noun phrases expand and define the token. They map the exact parameters of what kototiki actually means.
And notice the repetition there.
Exactly, the lexical cohesion. He repeats the desire domain ekthumia occurs twice. He is hammering on the internal cravings.
Pastorally, this elaborative triad is exactly where you unmask the illusion of worldly desires for your congregation. John takes the abstract philosophical concept of the world system and fractures it into three highly recognizable pragmatic spheres of temptation.
It's so practical.
It translates perfectly into modern pulpit application because human nature hasn't moved an inch since Ephesus. You preach the desire of the fleshitus sark as our modern physical and sensual cravings.
Right.
It's the insatiable appetite for comfort, for sexual gratification, for physical ease at the expense of holiness. It's the belief that my bodily desires are the ultimate arbiter of truth.
And then he pairs that with the visual stimulant.
Yes, the desire of the eyes and timon fam. You preach this as visual greed, covetousness. And honestly, this has never been more devastatingly relevant than in an era of hyper-visual social media and constant consumeristic display.
Oh, absolutely.
We literally carry rectangles of glowing glass in our pockets designed by neuroscientists to trigger the desire of the eyes every 3 seconds.
The doom scrolling.
It's the endless doom scrolling. The envy that rises up when you see someone else's curated vacation, the consumerism that demands you purchase what you just saw. It's the covetousness of the retina.
That's a powerful image.
And finally, the pride of life, elazonia tubao, the arrogance of physical existence. This is the ultimate status seeking.
The identity piece.
Right, it's the curation of a self-sufficient identity apart from God. It's the obsessive resume building, the need to be perceived as successful, wealthy, or intellectually superior. You have to unmask these three things not as isolated, occasional behavioral sins, but as the very fabric of the world system.
And John's grammar absolutely forces that exact interpretation. You can't separate them.
How so?
Because all three of those appositional phrases function collectively as the single token in this relational identifying process. They equal all that is in the world.
Ah, I see.
Which brings us to the value in clauses 216c and 216d. The token, the flesh, the eyes, the pride is now evaluated against its ultimate origin.
Walk us through those clauses. Where does John trace these desires back to?
Clause 216c, olishinektigashi, is not from the Father. And clause 216d, olishinextin, but is from the world.
Wow, okay.
Textually, we have strict adversative cohesion utilizing the olacute construct. Not this, but that. Ideationally, the relational identifying processes are evaluating origin.
So it's an evaluation of where it all comes from.
Exactly. The value assigned to the worldly triad is evaluated on the basis of the preposition of source or origin. It's either ektopatros or ektokosmo. But the textual markedness in 216d is incredibly aggressive.
What does he do?
John takes the prepositional phrase of origine ectocosmo and fronts it. He yanks it out of its normal syntactical order and places it before the verb estin to maximally accentuate the disjunction.
Okay, let me challenge that textual focus for a second, because this feels like a contradiction of our methodology.
Yeah.
Here's debate number 2.
Bring it on.
We have been insisting that the present tense form, the spatial proximity of the verb, is the dominant architectural feature of this passage.
Yes, we have.
But if John is aggressively fronting these prepositional phrases of origin ecto, patros, and ecto cosmo, doesn't that effectively background the verbal aspect entirely?
Background it, no.
Well, if the entire textual weight is placed on where these things come from, their historical or ontological source, does the kinetic action of the verb, the spatial proximity we've been tracking so carefully, even matter anymore? Does the origin eclipse the aspect?
That is a critical question, but I will defend the structural textual metafunction here by pointing right back to Campbell's spatial framework. Textual fronting does not negate the spatial proximity of the verb. It actively exploits it.
Exploits it. How?
The fronting of exu certainly accentuates the origin. It makes the source the most prominent idea in the clause. But the present tense form of S2 ensures that this clash of origins is not relegated to a distant, abstract, or historical realm. The textual markedness pulls the contrasting origins directly into the immediate view from the street.
So the fronting and the aspect are working in tandem to create an immediate crisis.
Precisely. Think about it this way. If John had used an aorist or a pluperfect here, the origin conflict would be a matter of remote historical theology.
Right, like an ancient debate.
It would be a discussion about where sin originated in the Garden of Eden. By utilizing the imperfective present tense form, the fronting guarantees that the reader feels this clash of origins as a present tense in-your-face reality.
It's happening right now.
Yes. It's not a theoretical theological chart mapping out where sin came from in the ancient past. It is an immediate, unfolding spatial crisis. The worldly origin of these desires is manifesting in close proximity to the reader right now.
That is a phenomenal defense, because it brings the origin into the living room. Think of the metaphor of a tainted water supply.
Ooh, I like that.
If you find out the reservoir across town is polluted with arsenic, the origin of the pollution is the reservoir. But when you turn on your kitchen sink and fill your glass, the proximity of that origin is right in your hand.
It's right there.
The origin hasn't eclipsed the present reality. The present reality is terrifying, specifically because of the origin. We must preach that affection is strictly governed by origin. That is a homiletic insight here.
You have to make them see it.
You look at your congregation and you tell them that worldly philosophy or, giving into the desire of the eyes on their smartphone isn't just bad behavior or a temporary lack of discipline. It literally originates outside the Father's spatial character, and you are holding that tainted origin in your hand right now.
The disjunction is absolute and present.
The fronting of the origin, combined with the spatial proximity, means you can't dabble in the desires of the flesh or the eyes and claim to be insulated from their source. The origin is active and present in the desire itself. If you're harboring pride of life, you are actively sourcing your identity from a system that is fundamentally antithetical to the Father.
Which brings us to a fascinating piece of lexical cohesion, the father domain.
Yeah, point that out.
Notice he doesn't say not from God in clause 16c. He says not from the Father house parts. He is pitting the cold, systemic spatial realm of the world against the intimate, familial, relational realm of the Father.
It's a clash of kingdoms.
Exactly, a clash of kingdoms based on relational identity. And that precise clash sets the stage for the massive aspectual climax of the entire passage in verse 17.
This is where everything coalesces. Clauses 217a through 217d. This is where the kinetic contrast of the text reaches its absolute zenith. Take us into the peak.
Clause 217 reads, Kalesmos producta karata ipodono, and the world is passing away, and its desire.
So what's shifting here?
Ideationally, we've shifted completely. We are no longer in mental processes of affection like in verse 15.
Yeah.
We are no longer in relational processes of identity like in verse 16.
Right.
We are now in a material process. The text has moved to undeniable physical action. Interpersonally, this is a highest certainty eschatological declaration.
And aspectually, what is the verb doing here?
This is the aspectual peak of the text. The verb is par gusta, a present passive indicative. Following Campbell, this encodes imperfective aspect and spatial proximity.
Okay.
The actor in this passive construction is a kosmos, and by ellipsis, epigono. The world and its desires are the things experiencing the material process of passing away.
Okay, I have to hit the brakes here. This is debate number 3, and it is my heaviest pushback yet.
All right, let's hear it.
You are calling paraktai the aspectual peak and insisting on spatial proximity, that this is an unfolding reality near to the speaker.
Because it is.
But if you read almost every major commentary on my shelf, and frankly, if you listen to most guys in the pulpit, they preach this verb as a futuristic present. They point to a temporal, apocalyptic end of the world.
They do.
They preach the world will pass away. Why can't I preach it that way? Why can't I stand up on Sunday morning, point to the sky, and say, Church, one day, in the future, God is going to drop a demolition ball on this world, so don't love it today.
Because if you preach it that way, you are fundamentally violating the morphological and coded meaning of the koinai Greek verb.
Violating it.
Yes, and you're actively dismantling the brilliant aspectual peak John carefully constructed. I vehemently reject the temporal intrusion here. We must strictly apply Campbell's axis of proximity.
Defend it. Why does translating this as a future apocalyptic event ruin the peak?
Because a futuristic present relies on a time-based framework that the present tense form simply does not possess. The author deliberately chose the present tense form to encode imperfective proximity.
But couldn't it just mean a future event?
No, if John wanted to point to a distant future eschatological event, the final demolition ball at the end of the age, he had the lexical and morphological tools to do so. He could have used an aorist or a future tense form to encode remoteness. He actively chose proximity. Under imperfective aspect, the action is viewed from the inside, unfolding in progress. The world is actively unraveling, decaying, and passing away right now.
Right now.
It is internally unfolding near to the speaker. It is not waiting for a future date to begin its destruction.
So it's not about an apocalyptic demolition ball swinging toward us in the future. It's about a present tense rotting from the inside out.
Exactly. The aspectual peak is achieved precisely because John takes what we normally consider a distant eschatological reality, the end of the world, and utilizes the spatial zoom to place that active decay right on the street corner where the believer is standing.
It's right outside the window.
It's happening in the room. The system is currently expiring.
I completely accept the spatial correction, and I have to tell you, the homiletic value of this is absolutely immense.
It really preaches, doesn't it?
Pastorally, this changes everything about how you preach verse 17, and it makes the argument against worldliness infinitely more compelling. If you preach a future apocalypse, people can just brush it off. Well, you know, that's 1,000 years from now. I can enjoy the desires of the flesh today.
Right, there's no urgency.
But you do not preach a future apocalypse. You preach the present, ongoing decay of the world system. Think of the metaphor of a piece of fruit. The world's not a perfect apple waiting to be smashed by a hammer next year.
It's a rotting apple.
Yes. The world is an apple that is actively rotting, molding, and decomposing on the kitchen counter right in front of you. You zoom in for the congregation on how quickly earthly status, digital empires, and material possessions are actively spoiling today.
Unfolding decay.
You point to the cultural idols they're tempted to love, the resumes they're obsessing over, the illicit relationships they're hiding, and you show them that those idols are already in a state of terminal kinetic decay. You look at your people and ask, why would you give your present affection, your lifeblood, to a system that is currently disintegrating in your hands?
It makes world love not just disobedient, but utterly irrational. And John immediately contrasts that present active decay with the destiny of the believer in the final clauses. 2:17b, c, and d.
Let's walk through how he lands the plane in those final clauses.
Clauses 2:17b through d read, Vita polem to theomin est vinana, but the one doing the will of God abides forever.
Okay, map that out.
The textual metafunction here is critical. We have contrast of participant fronting. The entire participial phrase autopoi thelomatoi is fronted. John uses the contrastive conjunction bait to sharply, violently pivot from the decaying world to the active believer.
A hard pivot.
Ideationally, we have an embedded material action in the participle. The actor is opoi, the one doing, and the goal is buphalima, the will of God. And then we move to the mainline relational material verb. Mine abides, or remains.
And both the participle for doing and the finite verb for abiding maintain that relentless present tense form.
They do. Both encode imperfective aspect and spatial proximity.
The contrast here is entirely kinetic. You have the active unfolding decay of the world in particai, juxtaposed directly against the continuous unfolding abiding of the believer in many. Pastorally, this is the ultimate anchor of eternal security.
Because of the aspect.
And notice, because of the strict spatial proximity of the present tense forms, this security isn't based on a remote, perfective past decision. It isn't just, well, you prayed a prayer 20 years ago, so you're safe. It's based on a present spatial alignment with the Father's will.
It's an ongoing alignment.
The continuous, unfolding abiding of the believer stands like a granite pillar against the active rotting of the world. You preach this as a present reality that stretches stent aphona into the eternal age. The believer is currently participating in the eternal reality, while the world is currently participating in its own demise.
The spatial zoom brings eternity into the present moment of obedience.
This is incredibly rich. We've tracked the SFL process types, the marked textual themes, and the unrelenting Campbell spatial proximity through every single clause of this pericope. Now it's time to synthesize everything.
Let's pull it together.
We need to take this granular linguistic framework and build the actual sermon. Let's start by formulating the big idea, live on air, bridging the ancient text to the modern pulpit.
We will utilize our standard homiletic formula for constructing a big idea. We identify the central participant, combine it with the primary process action, and frame it with the spatial or theological focal point.
Okay.
Looking at the cohesive chains we just tracked, the central participant is clearly the believer, defined by their relation to the world versus the Father.
The primary process action is anchored in that baseline imperative command from verse 15.
Yeah.
The mental process of refusing devotion or severing affection.
Yes.
And the spectral focal point is exactly what we just discussed in verse 17. The kinetic contrast between the present active decay of the world and the ongoing abiding of obedience.
So, drafting the big idea based strictly on the SFL and a spectral mapping, we arrive at this proposition. Because worldly desires originate apart from the Father and are actively decaying right now, you must aggressively refuse devotion to the world, rooting your ongoing obedience in the Father to abide forever.
That is tight.
Yeah.
It perfectly captures the origin disjunction from verse 16, the spatial proximity of the decay from verse 17, the mental process imperative from verse 15, and the spatial anchoring of the believer.
It has all the elements.
I'll say it again for the pastors taking notes. Because worldly desires originate apart from the Father and are actively decaying right now, you must aggressively refuse devotion to the world, rooting your ongoing obedience in the Father to abide forever. That is your sermon proposition. Now let's formulate the expository sermon outline organically from the text. I'm going to synthesize the structural breaks and SFL shifts you identified into a 3-point expository outline that you can preach this Sunday.
The textual boundaries we mapped support a 3-part structure perfectly.
Point 1. Command your affections. This is derived directly from the opening clause, 215a. We established that the imperative mood and the mental process of affection create a mainline baseline command.
The internal severing.
The application here is to reject subtle cultural conformity. You are calling your congregation to audit what they genuinely love. You don't just preach against bad actions, you preach against the internal cognitive and emotional devotion to the world's systems. You challenge the husband whose heart is wandering. You challenge the student who is desperate for secular validation. Command the affection.
And point 2 naturally flows from the conditional protasis and the relational identifying processes in verses 15b through 16d.
Exactly. Point 2. Unmask the illusion of origin. The application subpoints here write themselves based entirely on your SFL breakdown. Subpoint A is the diagnostic test of incompatibility. You explain the living vacuum.
You can't hold both.
You cannot hold spatial proximity to world love and father love simultaneously. Subpoint B exposes the triad of worldly desires. You translate the desire of the flesh, eyes, and pride into the modern realities of lust, consumerism, and digital narcissism. You expose the neurochemistry of doom scrolling as the desire of the eyes.
And subpoint C.
And subpoint C is the antithetical origin. You press the fronted markedness of exto. You show them that these desires are fundamentally alien to the Father's domain. They are tainted water from a poisoned reservoir.
Which leads directly to the spectral peak for point 3.
Point 3. Realize the present decay and anchor in the eternal. This is covering clauses 217 through D. Derived directly from the spatial zoom of paragesa passing away and the continuous reality of many abiding.
The kinetic contrast.
The application is a stark visual contrast. You show the congregation the rotting fruit of worldly trends. You point out how the things they are tempted to sacrifice their integrity for, the promotion, the illicit relationship, the social media clout, are actively rotting in their hands. And then you offer the profound pastoral comfort of the fronted participant. The one who is presently aligning with the will of God is already stepping into an eternity that will not decay.
To preach this outline effectively, though, we have to talk about bridging the ancient interpersonal stance to the modern pews. The SFL interpersonal metafunction revealed high-modality indicatives throughout this passage, specifically the fronted negation OSD, not ease.
Yes, and that requires the pastor to preach with absolute, unyielding certainty. When John uses high-modality indicatives to declare the absence of the Father's love in a worldly heart, or to declare the worldly origin of these desires, he is offering zero middle ground.
None at all.
You cannot step into the pulpit and soften this. You can't offer a nuanced, syncretistic compromise where a believer can keep one foot in the world's affections and one foot in the Father's domain. The grammar forbids it. The high modality demands that you preach with absolute, uncompromising certainty. You have to look your people in the eye and tell them the truth without apologizing for the text.
And furthermore, the proximity forms, the relentless present tense forms we tracked in every single clause demand an urgent, immediate tone. Because we applied Campbell's spatial model, we know this is not a theological abstract. The imperfective aspect viewed from the street means this is about the listener's immediate daily life.
You have to bring the tension of the text right into the room. When you preach point 3 about the decay of the world, you can't use a sleepy, future-oriented, speculative tone. Well, brothers and sisters, one day Jesus will return and destroy the world.
No, absolutely not.
No. You must have urgency. You declare, the world is passing away right now. It is decaying in your homes. It is rotting on your screens. It is spoiling in your bank accounts. The proximity forms give you the homiletic authority to make the text an immediate crisis and an immediate comfort.
The linguistic framework is not just a study tool for your office. It dictates the actual homiletic delivery in the pulpit.
It dictates the passion, the volume, the pleading with the congregation. This SFL in a spectral breakdown shifts 1 John chapter 2 from a tired, moralistic sermon on don't watch bad movies to a profound, heart-rending plea to anchor your spatial reality in the eternal Father before the floorboards of the world completely rot out from under you.
As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final provocative thought to mull over as you prepare your notes, building on the cohesive mapping we did earlier.
What's this?
We noted the lexical cohesion of the father domain, the words pater and patras, used repeatedly in verses 15 and 16. Consider this. Joey could have easily used the generic word for God throughout this entire section to describe the divine realm.
Sure, he could have.
But he specifically, deliberately contrasts the world cosmos with the Father. I want you to consider how substituting the systemic abstract idea of the world with a deeply relational familial participant, the Father, completely reframes that initial prohibition in verse 15a.
It makes it a family issue. It isn't just about cosmic jurisdiction.
Exactly. The command, do not love the world, isn't just about breaking a divine rule or violating a cold cosmic law. By anchoring the alternative in the Father, John frames worldliness as an act of relational treason.
Relational treason. Wow.
It is a child bringing the affections of a hostile, decaying system into the warmth and purity of the Father's house. The spatial proximity we've discussed means that treason is not happening in secret. It is happening right in front of the Father's face.
That reframing changes absolutely everything about how you counsel someone struggling with systemic sin. It isn't a legal failure. It's a relational betrayal. When you're sitting in your office with a young man addicted to the desire of the eyes on his phone, you don't just give him a checklist to manage his behavior. You point him back to the Father. You remind him of the relational reality he is betraying. We encourage you to take this granular linguistic framework, the SFL process types, the marked textual fronting, and especially the rigorous application of Campbell's spatial proximity directly into your sermon prep and your pastoral counseling this week. Do not let the text sit in the remote distance. Bring it close. Apply the spatial proximity of God's abiding will to the immediate daily lives of your people. Because the world is passing away right now, but the one doing the will of God abides forever.